Hello, and welcome to this section of Lean Six Sigma White Belt. In this section, we're going to focus on understanding the 7 types of waste. From a white belt perspective, it's very important for us to be able to put the types of waste in different categories, and you'll see that there's 7 different types of waste. And the most powerful concept I want you to take away from this section is the fact that we have to be able to identify and label waste as a critical first step for waste elimination. So I'll introduce you to a concept and an acronym known as Tim Wood. And Tim Wood is not your friend, but Tim Wood corresponds to the 7 different types of waste. And we'll go through those right now. So here's the 7 types of waste right in front of us. So think Tim Wood, and as we go through these, I'll give you a high-level example, and then we'll give you some real-world, almost case studies of how to remember Tim Wood. Typically what we see in white belts is that once you start to become familiar with the 7 types of waste, you're already probably picking up these things in your processes. You're probably already detecting them, but you may not have always had a vocabulary to say, oh, that's transportation waste, or that's defects, or that's overprocessing. So the most common feedback I receive is, I kind of knew the types of waste, but I didn't have a vocabulary or a lexicon that I could use to say, yep, I know it when I see it. Now I can call it and put it in a category. And for a white belt, that's really important because at the white belt level, we don't really expect you to improve the processes, but being able to identify where we have opportunities for improvement is huge. It makes you a valuable asset to your teams and to your organization. So Tim Wood is what I would consider another very fundamental piece of Lean and Six Sigma. And up to this point, you can identify Lean, Six Sigma, what is Lean, what is Six Sigma. In the previous course, an instruction video, we went through the details of DMAIC, and now we're going to cover the 7 types of waste. And once we get through this section, you're going to be really strong in regards to white belt capability. So congratulations for making it this far, but let's take a deep dive into the 7 types of waste. So transportation. So transportation is the unnecessary movement of people or parts between processes. And we'll talk about the most common pitfall here between transportation and motion. If you look ahead, motion talks about unnecessary movement of people, things, or machines within a process. So typically people get caught up on what's transportation waste or what's motion waste. The easiest way to differentiate between the two is transportation is moving people, parts, things between processes, and motion is really within a process area, unnecessary movement. And I'll give you a couple examples of real world things that I think help solidify that. So transportation, we just covered inventory, raw material, work in process, or finished goods which are not having value added to it. So typically think about ordering too much of a supply, and that runs the risk of, if you've got too much inventory on hand, you're using space, you run the risk of potential items expiring, going bad. So there's a lot of different types of opportunities around inventory. Ideally, you're building your inventory based on customer demand, but just be able to look for and identify different types of inventory waste. Motion, we quickly covered that with transportation, but again, that's just within process motion. Waiting, people or things that wait for work to be completed. And as all of us consumers, we can think about time that we've waited in line to be served, or waited in a doctor's office, waited in a dentist office. So waiting is something easy for the consumer to identify and label because it is one of the types of waste. Over processing, this is the idea of processing beyond the standard required by the customer, almost going above and beyond what they really need. So that's the intent of over processing. Overproduction, producing too soon, too fast, or in greater quantities than the customer demands. And one thing if you heard that last part of overproduction, greater quantities than the customer demand, one thing interesting about these waste, and when you see them in process, is they tend to manifest and feed off of each other. So you could really easily see that overproduction, producing too soon, too fast, in greater detail, or greater quantities. If you do have overproduction, some of those greater quantities can result in too high of an inventory, and then you've got an inventory waste problem. So what we typically see is that once your processes are starting to become filled with waste, you start to see multiple variations of these 7 types of waste. The last type of waste is called defects, and these are just things that are broken or things that don't meet requirements. It's really simple. And if you step back here, and we walk through those pretty quick, but you can just kind of look at transportation, inventory, motion. That's TIM. So transportation, inventory, motion, TIM. And then wood is waiting, overprocessing, overproduction, and defects. So using that acronym of TIM wood, it's an easy way to help remember the different types of waste that you see in a process. And again, just as a reminder, at the white belt level, being able to recite the 7 types of waste and being able to identify them in a process makes you a really, really strong white belt. So again, at this point in your white belt journey, we're not looking at tools. We're not looking at specific ways to improve them. We just want to be able to identify opportunities for improvement. And these 7 types of waste give you almost a new set of glasses to look at processes and say, oh, that's transportation waste, that's motion, that's overprocessing, that's overproduction, or that's defects. So that's one main learning objective for us in this course. I'm going to go a little deeper, though, and give you some real-world examples. The feedback I typically get after going through introducing the 7 types of waste in Tim Wood, feedback from people that have taken courses in the past typically say, I go back to my personal life now, and I look at things even different in my house, and I can't help but think of all the waste that exists in my life. So I'm going to give you some examples that may resonate with you, and hopefully what I'd hope that would happen is that you start looking for these 7 types of waste in your professional and personal life. Because again, I think just having an increased awareness of the 7 types of waste help you become a better problem solver and ultimately a better white belt. So transportation, and I'm going to use some silly life examples. So if in your personal life, laundry is something that you want to stay up on, and you want to make sure that you have clean clothes and things like that, you can start to use the DMAIC process here, but I won't go into that kind of detail. Typically, from processing the laundry, you take your laundry basket from maybe a bedroom or a bathroom, and then you transport those parts, your clothes, down to your laundry room. Depending on your house and how it's laid out, that is a form of transportation waste. Now, you may say, well, that's necessary. I have to do that. And that's typically what we see with these teams that are going through trying to find breakthrough ideas, is that they try to normalize their waste, that we've designed the process this way and it's got to be this way. And we're not looking for solution, but just inviting that open dialogue to say, is there a different way? If we want to make sure that we have clean laundry and we want to reduce the transportation waste, it takes me approximately 3 to 5 minutes to take the laundry from my bathroom down to the laundry room. And is there a way that we can do that differently? And at the white belt level, that's all you want to be able to do, is just question processes. So that laundry example was kind of silly. I hope you could relate to it. But think about things in your work life, your professional life, where you may be transporting things that now that you know Tim Wood, you may be able to pause and say, is there a better way? Is there a different way we can do this? Inventory. Think of a time when you had something in your pantry or your refrigerator that expired and you had to throw out. That's an easy way to identify inventory waste. And typically inventory waste, you want to meet your demand with your capacity. So if you've had a loaf of bread go bad, something in your process, and I know this sounds silly, but something in your process said that you didn't have the demand that you typically have for that loaf of bread, maybe this week, this month, and you had to throw it out. So that's a form of inventory waste, that you had too much bread. Now think about that in your professional and your work life. Where have you had supplies go bad? Do you have too many sheets of paper? Do you just insert your opportunity here and think about ways that you've seen inventory waste in your professional life? Motion, unnecessary movement of things or machines within a process. The best example I can give you here, several years ago, I went on a tour at Toyota, and they were making Camrys, Toyota Camrys, on the assembly line, and it was a thing of beauty. It was almost like magic. You would watch the assembly line, these dozens and thousands of cars. The day that I went there, they were producing over 3,000 Camrys. It was phenomenal. But when you watch these workers on the assembly line, each one of them had a certain station that they worked in. Those stations were so ergonomically efficient. They were swinging under cars. They had everything that they needed to do their job within arm's reach. They didn't have to use unnecessary motion, and it was just beautiful. So use that example. Think about ways, maybe in your current work environment, where maybe you're stretching or reaching for something, or you typically, you have to go out of your way to process something. Challenge your thinking around, is this motion waste? Waiting, this is an easy one. We've all been to the dentist or the doctor or getting the oil change, and there's been waiting associated with that. And that is just one of the most obvious types of waste. Over-processing, this is going beyond the standard required by the customer. One of the most recent examples that I shared with the team, they were processing reports, and there were only certain elements of this report that was value added to the customer, but yet we were giving them almost reams of paper with this when they were only looking for a critical few elements. That's an example of over processing. So we were giving them too much information that the customer didn't even require. Overproduction. Again, if your demand is saying that you need 100 things and your process is producing 1,000 things, that's an overproduction type of waste, and that leads into the inventory like we talked about earlier. And then defects. This is just something that's broken. Think about a time when maybe you went to a bank or you went to a restaurant, and maybe the waiter gave you a pen to sign the check, and you went to sign the check and the pen didn't work. So in that process, the check, the final payment process, there was a defect that the pen was broken. And now that you know about this type of waste, what I love to see is how sometimes the waiter or the bank teller will take that pen and put it right back into the process flow. So the next person that comes into the teller or in the restaurant, they're going to give them that same pen that's defective. So again, these are real life examples that are very easy to wrap our minds around, but hopefully you're starting to see the power of being able to see the 7 types of waste in process, because it's really vital for us to be able to identify and label the waste so we can eliminate it. So those were really high-level examples of the 7 types of waste. I hope you remember TIM Wood as an acronym: transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overprocessing, overproduction, defects. The more you can become familiar with those 7 types of waste, the more familiar you're going to be at being able to identify and eliminate those. I did want to go over one more slide really quick, and it's typically we call it the 8th type of waste. So when you're working in processes that are heavily dependent upon people, and those processes become very inefficient because of the 7 types of waste, think of those process steps and that inefficiency as ultimately being disrespectful to people. And when I started using that term, disrespectful, and respect for people, I think it moves people in a different way that no one would ever design a process that's disrespectful to people. And what I mean by that is if you ask people to work in a process that, let's just say it's 80% non-value added, let's just say 80% of the process is waste, no one would ever design a process to do that. But if you don't have this kind of mindset, and if you don't know how to effectively categorize the types of waste, and you don't design an efficient process, the byproduct is ultimately this processes that are disrespectful to people. So we introduce this as the 8th type of waste. It sometimes helps move people from thinking that, Lean and Six Sigma is all about stats and more of a technical mindset. There's a big adaptive piece here around people. And I challenge you to think about, how is Lean and how is Six Sigma and building efficient processes ultimately respectful to people. So just another soundbite to think of, but in this section we review Tim Wood and the 7 types of waste. There's a small quiz after this section that helps reinforce the principles of Tim Wood and the 7 types of waste that you find in processes. Thanks for checking out this section.